Let me introduce to you our featured speaker tonight, Shelley Lubben. Shelley is an embodiment of the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. She was stuck for 8 years in the sex industry, 2 years in the porn industry. She has been saved, redeemed, empowered to change lives across the world. She's now been married to her husband, Garrett, and they founded the Pink Cross Foundation in 2007. They are single-handedly saving women from the sex industry and taking on the porn industry in ways that only God can do. And this woman defines courage for me when you know what she's gone through. Let's welcome Shelley Lubben.
Thank you, Pure Hope, so much for giving me the honor of speaking tonight and for sharing in your awesome celebration of a successful year. Congratulations. And I also want to thank you for your tireless efforts to offer hope to the sexual broken. Our nation is in desperate need for healing and repentance from sexual sin. With 40 million Americans being regular visitors to internet porn sites and the United States being responsible for 420 million pages of porn, America is in an advanced state of cultural depravity. Our children are being spoon-fed pornography. Many of our young men are in slavery to pornography. Middle-class American girls are signing up to become porn stars, and wives are brokenhearted over their husbands who prefer to have sex with a computer image rather than them. As Christian parents, we have allowed the sexualized culture to slip in through the cracks of our homes through television, the internet, magazines, and even our clothing. We know we care about our children, but truthfully, we don't care enough. Oftentimes, we look the other way while the world wins the hearts of our children. This is what happened to me. I grew up in the typical American Christian family that watched and worshiped television shows about homosexuality, sex, adultery, even swinging and divorce. My mother always said the TV was the best babysitter. As a child, I was left to myself often. One day, I was at a house with my classmate, and there was no parental supervision, and I was sexually abused by a teenage boy and his sister. I had my first homosexual and heterosexual experience at 9 years old. I was devastated, to say the least, and very shamed, and at that moment, I believed the lie that I was a dirty little girl. Seeking attention from boys led me to have sex at age 15. I was looking for love, acting out, trying to get attention because my own father was unavailable for me. All I ever really wanted was my father to hold me and tell me that he loved me. I began drinking alcohol and going to clubs at 16, smoking pot. I was allowed to do all these things. My parents knew I was involved in sex and alcohol and drugs, but they preferred to ignore the problem while I continued to self-destruct. By the time I was 17, I lost my driver's license for being a reckless driver, and I was flunking out of high school. But nobody cared that I was falling apart. My parents cared more about what other people thought about our family, so we hid the problem. And after I barely graduated high school at age 18, my dad had had enough of my rebellion, and he kicked me out on the street, where I ended up on a curb in the San Fernando Valley, the porn capital of the world. I had no idea. I was only 18 years old, and I was sitting on a curb crying my eyes out when a nice man walked over to me, and he felt sorry for me, and he wrapped his arms around me while I wept on his chest, and I thought Jesus had come to save me. See, I knew Jesus when I was a little girl. I learned about him in Sunday school. But after a few years, my parents stopped attending church, and so we got away from the Lord and our family. But this man was wrapping his arms around me, and it was the first time an older man had done something like that. Not long after, he began to proposition me and say very smoothly, "Honey, you know, you're so pretty, and there's a nice man across the street who'd like to make love to you for $35. I was like, I'm not a prostitute. But after I thought about it, I thought about how my parents were sleeping in their warm beds while I was out on the street, hungry and homeless. And all of a sudden, a voice came to me and said, "Your parents don't care. God doesn't care." And I thought, yeah, why should I care? and I sold myself for $35 into a life of prostitution. At first, the pimp was real nice, but after a while, he started being forceful and abusive and trying to tell me and force me to do bizarre sex acts. And I literally had to break out of his apartment just to get away from him. And I ended up on another curb in the San Fernando Valley. And I was desperate. I was hungry. And I literally would walk into places like mechanic shops and wherever men were working, and I would just ask them if, they wanted to have a sexual favor for $50. I mean, I was pathetic. And after a while, a madam saw me on the street, and she actually picked me up and took me to her home where there were other young girls living, and she actually taught me the glamorous side of prostitution. She taught me about personal hygiene, which my mother never taught me about. She taught me how to lie and manipulate men out of every last dollar. And I remember being 18 years old and thinking how pathetic they were, that they needed an 18-year-old girl to act like she really cared about them. And I learned to start hating men at that moment. And the first 14 months that I was a prostitute, I learned the hard way, and I got pregnant twice. The first time I lost my baby is a miscarriage. The second time, the baby kept growing inside of me, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I prayed to God, and I said, God, can you help me? Can you get me out of this? I don't know what to do, and things like abortion crossed my mind, and I thought, there's no way I could kill my baby. There's one value I had left from Sunday school, and that was I could never kill my own baby. And so I kept my baby, and I left the madam, and I went down to downtown Los Angeles and lived in a hotel and started working in strip clubs. I actually stole an ID because you had to be 21 to work in topless clubs. And, I was there for a few months, and at first you're new meat, and all the guys love you, and they're tipping you. But after a few months, you're old meat, and you have to go to another strip club, and you have to move around. And actually, stripping was just as bad as prostitution. Men were putting drugs in our drinks. They were grabbing us, pulling our hair, telling us everything that was wrong with us, what we needed to fix, meeting their demands. And more and more, my hatred for men grew. And after about 6 years of doing prostitution and stripping back and forth, I became burned out. By then I was a major alcoholic and drug user and a horrible mother to my daughter. I would give my 3-year-old daughter a beeper and tell her to wait at the park until I was done doing tricks, and then I would beep her to come home. And my family saw me live this way. They saw their granddaughter suffer, and yet they still ignored the problem. No one came to me in those years that I was a prostitute and stripper. No Christians ever reached out to me and said, "Are you okay, honey?" Clearly, I was a mess, but no one cared. I was just a hooker to everybody. By the time 6 years had passed, I was totally burned out on prostitution and strip clubs. And a porn star came into the strip club and saw me dancing and told me how hot I was and that I should try doing porn. And of course, I was like, porn, Back then, it was in the 90s, and there was no internet, so you didn't know a lot about porn. But it appealed to me because she said porn was legal and you can make like $2,000 a movie. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of money for a burned out prostitute. And I asked her, is it safe? And of course, she assured me that porn people were the cleanest people in the world because they got an AIDS test every 30 days. So I agreed reluctantly, and I showed up to my first porn scene, and it was traumatic. I knew when I walked in, I was walking into something really horrible. And only alcohol and drugs could get me through it. And when the scene began, something dark came over me, and a voice said to me, "Shelley, I'll make you famous and everyone will love you." And suddenly I was empowered supernaturally to just be this wild animal in front of the camera, just out to prove to the world that I was the best. And all the rage I had toward my parents and toward men who'd abused me fueled me to perform in front of the camera. And of course, a pornographer is there is telling you, "Wow, I've never seen a girl like you. Oh my gosh, you're going to be the next hottest, biggest porn star. You're going to be big." It was like that male approval I was seeking, and it was like the pornographer became the father I always wanted.